Hello everyone, I am back, and I should probably start this by answering a question that I'm sure is out there. Have I watched any more WCW 1992 pay-per-views since my last video? And the answer there is yes, I have. I watched Super Brawl 2, which was their first pay-per-view that year, unless you count the co-promotion with New Japan's Dome show in January. But, you know, Super Brawl is a pretty decent show. Not as good as the Beach Blast show that I reviewed earlier, which might have something to do with me just not having the desire to talk about the show or review the show at all. But I might get that desire back later. The only thing I'll say right now is that the match of the night on that pay-per-view was a tag team match. Again, Barry Windham and Dustin, I'm sorry, versus Larry Zbyszko and Steve Austin. I think it's every bit as good, if not better, than the six-man tag I gave praise to on the Beach Blast show. I think I was definitely on the right track in thinking that tag team wrestling is the most worthwhile thing to seek out from this era of WCW. You know, I really hope that there's a true tag team classic somewhere in WCW's 1992. They definitely had the talent. They had the right kind of stylistic approach. You know, whether or not there's a real classic just depends on, you know, everything coming together, I guess. If it's there, I'll find it. And if and when I do find it, I'm sure that is something that will get me doing another video on this era of WCW. But this video is about something different. This video is about WWE wrestling style. And, you know, something I found interesting, something that got me thinking about this was, you know, when Punk and Bryan, when their pay-per-view match happened, there was a bit of disagreement about whether it was a Ring of Honor style match or a WWE style match. You know, a disagreement not necessarily on YouTube, but on the forum that I frequent. And this video was not a direct answer to that question. It's just something that kind of got me thinking about the wider issue of what is WWE style. Did I watch the Punk Bryan match from Over the Limit? Yes. Did I enjoy it? Yes, I did. But I thought the middle of the match dragged quite a bit, and to be honest, I personally prefer Sheamus vs. Bryan from Extreme Rules, to be honest. But, you know, in answer to the question of was Punk versus Bryan a Ring of Honor style match, well, I think you can find the answer to that question in the way they worked the finish of the match. I think it's very clearly WWE style trade finisher attempts instead of finisher kickouts, and that makes a big difference. You know, Punk going for the GTS, it gets reversed. Bryan going for the yes lock, it gets reversed, and eventually it's the successful execution of a finishing move that's what makes the difference. That's what gets the win. And that stuff, to me, is what makes it feel very much like WWE style. You know, the stuff that's going on in between the finisher attempts is often the most important stuff, because that's where the finisher attempts are set up to appear unpredictable, to appear convincing, and, you know, also where the final move of the match can stand out as the final move, you know, as a match that you feel satisfied about ending a match that you were hopefully enjoying. You know, that's a feature of what I think WWE style is. That's not Ring of Honor style, which, you know, I don't think anyone would disagree that the finished stretch of a Ring of Honor style match these days is two guys with certain trademark moves kicking out of them many times in the space of one match. You know, people are going to disagree on whether or not that makes for entertaining wrestling, but I don't think anyone would try to seriously argue that that's not what's happening in a Ring of Honor ring these days. You know, Richards versus Elgin being your perfect example. I haven't seen enough to be sure if that's how the matches were laid out when Bryan and Punk were in Ring of Honor, but I think that is the difference as of right now. You know, the only time WWE go for the multitude of finisher kickouts is WrestleMania, where they feel like they have to take the match itself, they have to make the match itself a spectacle. And the problem is they're sticking to that one method of creating a spectacle, and in some ways I can't blame them, because year after year fans and even people on here keep buying into all these false finishes, even though there's so little variation in what's going on. You know, you can create a spectacle by having a wrestler introduce a new strategy or making a comeback, relying on something that they don't normally rely on. I'm even okay with overbooking as long as it's smartly done and not something that we see year after year. I mean, I think the biggest reason why Triple H versus Undertaker this year was so insulting is that they did appear to be introducing a new threat to Undertaker's streak, which was Triple H with a steel chair and a referee who had an agenda of his own. Sounds good on paper. Sounds more interesting than the approach Triple H took to trying to win the WrestleMania 27 match, but it all fell apart. Partly because of Shawn Michaels' horrible acting, but mostly because Undertaker completely no-sold that chair shot assault, so we could run through a completely generic comeback, and then it was the finisher trading itself that was supposed to get us into the ending, or get us through the ending. So, what does that tell me? It tells me that the chair shot assault never meant a damn thing, and that the finishers were the only thing to get you guessing about the ending. And we've seen Undertaker kick out of so much stuff already to be won over by those finishers. That's how I see it, and yet people have managed to convince themselves that because it's WrestleMania, that it's okay to do a match like that. It's exactly because it's WrestleMania that you shouldn't do a match like that, because that they should be bringing something different to the table every year, and they're not doing that. Cena versus Lesnar. That is spectacle. That is 100% spectacle. It's a complete anomaly that doesn't fall into the WWE style bracket. It doesn't fall into any style bracket in the United States, at least. I'd say it fits loosely into the Inoki style bracket, but it's been a long time since there was a comparable match in New Japan. And, it's a spectacle, and they managed to make that finish work with just one Cena finishing move. And I'm not going to repeat why that finish worked so well. You can go back to my last video to hear my opinion on that. But that was a match that, despite not having a bunch of false finishes, could very easily have main evented at WrestleMania. And I'm not suggesting that the only way to create an original spectacle at WrestleMania is through bringing in a special attraction. Lesnar was a different kind of threat to Cena. You can present any of your regulars as a different kind of threat to Undertaker, with a compelling storyline and a character. That's where that kind of stuff can positively affect the match and the way it's worked. Punk versus Cena last year. Was that perfect? No, it wasn't perfect. They did fall into the trap of finisher overkill now and then. But that crowd atmosphere that made Cena a makeshift heel made him controlling that match just that much more interesting. And the biggest moment of that match was the counters around the STF and the Anaconda Vice, and then the Laurinaitis run-in at the end. Those are spectacle qualities that make the match memorable, in spite of that finisher overkill. So that's what I'm wanting to see more of when they do their spectacles at WrestleMania. Okay, so at this stage I've talked a bit about the common finish in a WWE style match, and also a bit about the whole issue of a spectacle in some of the company's big matches. So at this point, am I ready to say that the WWE style is a template style? Because, the way they treat their finishers and their signature moves, like I described before, it means you're going to get certain things in most matches, and there's not many different endings you can get. Apart from a finisher ending, you could get a roll-up in certain situations, and of course you can get the creative finish, which they tend to give us, and it's a bit different from Japan, where, a lot of different moves can finish the match, and even the wrestlers that do have finishers, they're often so simple that it doesn't feel like you're thinking in terms of, are they using this finisher too much? It just feels like you're thinking in terms of, the effect the move is having towards the overall direction of the match. And what I mean by that is, for example, Takayama, who has a finisher. It's called the Everest German. But he could take the direction of weakening an opponent with several of those German suplexes and then ending the match with a knee strike and making it work. There'll be important stuff going on in between all those moves, but you get the general idea. Another example, Kawada, whose finisher is the powerbomb, could do the exact same thing and end the match with a well-placed kick. Kobashi, who had the burning hammer and the moonsault, could go through both of them in a match, and I could see him ending the match with a lariat and making it convincing. The selling has to be on point in all of the examples I've just given you, but you get the general idea. The sport atmosphere in Japan can give credibility to the simplest moves in a way that doesn't tend to happen in the US. Could that work in American wrestling? I don't think there's much point in speculating on that, because I don't think we'll ever see it. A finisher is part of a guy's overall gimmick package, so there's an extra obligation for an American wrestler to win his matches with it. But considering that, within the context of the WWE style, I think you can really tell the really good workers based on how well they do that ending stretch with a lot of finisher attempts. Based on how well they do the classic WWE transitions and the spots. And I'm continually surprised by how well some of the guys do it. You know, it's kind of striking when you think about it, how entertaining it can be despite how predictable it sounds on paper. You know, CM Punk and Daniel Bryan, their matches this year have had some of the best examples of that. You know, Christian and Orton from their matches last year. Then you have matches like the Punk versus Henry TV matches this year. Different situation, big man versus little man, can allow for more variables in how the whole template works. You know, Punk can't GTS Henry, so he'll rely on his kicks. Punk being able to reverse the world's strongest slam feels a lot more momentous when the size difference is emphasized. So, you know, logic and selling aren't limitations here. They're the opposite. They're how you create exceptional moments, you know, unique moments. So there are some things to think about with the WWE one-on-one traditional match style. The next thing to consider, I think, is gimmick matches, which I'm going to put in a separate category. You know, like I've said before, I believe the best gimmick matches are the ones where the wrestlers or wrestler, whatever the case is, when they stand out more than the gimmick itself. You know, I didn't like last year's SmackDown Money in the Bank because there were a lot of guys in there, but no one got to be showcased for more than 2 minutes. On the other hand, you had last December's TLC 3-way for the WWE Championship. You had Del Rio dominating for a long while. You had Miz with the handcuffs on Punk. You used the gimmick ideas to highlight the skills of the wrestlers, or whatever, you know, traits of the wrestlers you're looking to emphasize. And now, I think this is a good moment to bring up what I'm sure most of you have read in the description box at this stage. After doing several of those videos, looking at famous WWE matches, I can finally say that I found one that I can give the full 5 stars to. And that is the 10-man tag at In Your House Canadian Stampede from July 1997. You know, I looked at both Bret Austin matches, you saw me do that, and I didn't like the Survivor Series one. The WrestleMania match is indeed one of the better matches from 1997, but I think it's overrated. But here we have Team Austin versus the Hart Foundation, 10-man match. Do you want to make everyone stand out? Simple answer is I don't think you should. You know, don't try to make everyone stand out. Decide who's going to be your MVP of the match. Put together the match in a way that gives him the opportunity to shine, and you run with it and see how he does. And the MVP in this match is Steve Austin, and, you know, does he ever make the most of this opportunity? The opening exchange with Bret is just brilliant. Later he and Owen get hurt to the point where they have to leave the match. And when Austin limps back to that ring, we get an absolutely classic finish stretch. You know, the stuff he does with Bret is possibly the best stuff they've done together. You know, keeping in mind what I've said about inserting your finishers in creative ways, there's an absolutely wonderful, amazing stunner counter in here. And they trade sharpshooter attempts. Unbelievable to watch, I think. You know, the Canadian crowd was great for this as well. And I like the finish too. You know, Austin was able to look like a dangerous killer while the Hart Foundation got the win, which felt like right in the atmosphere they had going for them there. So the finish accomplishes both, which isn't easy to do. So like I said, Canadian Stampede main event, 10-man tag, 5 stars, and the best WWE match I've seen so far. You know, the perfect example of a wrestler standing out in a gimmick match more than the actual gimmick itself. You know, because some people might point to the fact that Austin was so far ahead of everyone else in this match and use it as a negative. And without a doubt, you know, the exchanges between guys like Owen Hart, Goldust, the Legion of Doom, those guys weren't up to much here. But it was an absolutely fantastic Austin performance, and I wouldn't want anything taking the spotlight from him here. So, you know, this was actually a perfect Attitude Era style wrestling match done before the Attitude Era even officially began. Because it was 10-man brawl, a lot of corner stomps, some bumps against the table and the stairs, but they had someone to highlight, and he stepped up to that. You know, whereas the Attitude Era was in full swing, they pushed the gimmicks so hard that the wrestlers didn't look good within their matches at all, I don't think. I'm going to finish this with just one more question about WWE style. You know, the question would be, is there technical wrestling in the WWE? And has there ever been technical wrestling in the WWE? You know, the reason I bring this up is because I don't think many people have a usable definition of technical wrestling. You know, when you hear it, you think it means submission work, and yet Benoit was continually praised for being a technical wrestler. You know, Benoit was a brawler with a submission as a finisher. That's what Benoit was. You know, the body of the match, you'd have chops, German suplexes, headbutts, but the submission work stayed with the finisher. And, you know, Kurt Angle was the same. He hit you with different forms of suplexes throughout most of the match, but the submission was contained to the finisher. Bret Hart, the matches I've seen him in, I've struggled to get a real grasp of what his real strengths are outside of the submission finisher. You know, that probably sits the least well for him in terms of how good a worker he was. But, you know, the general point is, from what I've seen, the term technical wrestling seems to be misused a lot. I try not to use it when I give a review because I don't think it has a meaning that people can agree on. When they hear it, they kind of think, okay, what does he mean when he says that? You know, when I think of submission wrestling, I'm thinking of two guys on the mat moving through holds in a competitive way. You know, mat work, that kind of mat work isn't a feature of the WWE style. You know, to me, it seems like the workers who have technical wrestling gimmicks, they do well when they try to make other aspects of their work besides the finisher interesting. You know, Benoit managed to do that. He could hit hard, he could sell something with so much agony on his face. It's the sort of stuff that puts him head and shoulders above Kurt Angle. You know, and the reason I bring this up at all is because I think now we have Daniel Bryan working important matches on pay-per-view, and he seems to be straying from that trend I just talked about, because he does use submissions beyond just the finisher. You know, he'll put a lot behind that surfboard in the Punk match, but he also has his strikes, and I think the strikes are making all the difference in his current crop of matches. I mean, the Sheamus pay-per-view match was basically all about strikes. I think the best part of Bryan's offense in the Punk match were the strikes. You know, if he can keep up that versatility, I think he can have a real classic match this year or in the near future if he manages to stay relevant in the WWE hierarchy. You know, the third fall of the Sheamus match drags that match down from being a classic. The middle of the Punk match does the same thing. But the good points about those matches are all the tools he needs to have a classic. If he can just bring them together and the circumstances are just right, I think he can have a real classic in the near future. So that's my closing thought. There's a bunch of thoughts in there about the WWE style. I invite you to share your own thoughts down there. Do the regular YouTube thing. Comments. Maybe I'll be lucky enough to get some video responses. And I'll talk to you guys later.